This class is brought to you by the M.A.G Network and is part of our monthly education series. To find out about upcoming online and in-person events, subscribe and like our YouTube channel, or join our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/groups/M.A.G Network. If you have comments or suggestions for possible upcoming classes, email them at mag.network@outlook.com. There will be link and contact information at the end of this video.
Hello and welcome to the M.A.G Network. We are happy to have Malia and Matt Kelly from Hidden Hilltop Homestead in Kentucky with us tonight. They will be talking about cultivating mushrooms. Malia is one of our M.A.G Network and Kentucky Homestead Traditions members and can be reached there or via their Facebook page with any additional questions. We will have a link to their page and both groups at the end of this video.
Malia, thank you very much for you and Matt welcoming us back into your home again. This is y'all's second class that you've done for us, and we definitely greatly appreciate it, ma'am, and looking forward to hearing everything.
Yeah, well, I very much appreciate being able to be here and getting the chance to talk about this. I think that mushrooms are just one of those really, really fascinating things to both learn about and grow, and probably especially eat. Very, very tasty. But you know, it's one of those things that I've heard before, but it is very true that if you want to truly understand something, one of the best ways is to teach that thing. So getting the chance to sit down and really think through things and have to write it down has actually helped me learn even more. So I really appreciate the chance to be here and to share some of my excitement about mushrooms. So, all right. So with that, I guess we will go ahead and kick off. Everyone should be able to see my screen. Is that correct? Cultivating mushrooms.
I've got it.
Okay. All right, great. Let's go ahead and kick off then. Okay. All right. So first off, one of the things that I wanted to touch on was some terminology, because there's some words that we use when talking about mushrooms that you may or may not be familiar with. So I figured we'd just kind of talk about what some of these words are and what they mean. The first word that I want to touch on is mycology. And mycology is the study of fungi. But one of the things that I really want to kind of hit home in this is the idea that when we talk about fungi, it's an entire kingdom. You know, there's what, 5 or 6, depending on who you talk to, kingdoms, and fungi are an entire kingdom. So there's a lot to cover there. One of the other interesting things with mycology is that mushrooms grow in a similar way, somewhat similar way to plants, but they breathe in oxygen and release CO2 more like animals. So, and that's just one kind of example of what kind of sets them apart from some of these other things. There's some complexities in what they do and how they interact. And so with mycology, mycologists are the people who study mycology. So they're involved in the complexities of both animal-like and plant-like attributes that fungi exhibit. So that's mycology. The next thing that I'm going to talk on is spores. So spores are kind of at their essence, quote unquote, mushroom seed. But like pollen, a spore is incomplete and would actually need to have another half to be able to reproduce. So once the spore has become mated, it changes from being a spore into the next thing that we're going to be talking about, which is spawn. So spawn is the carrier of vigorous fungal roots or mycelium. And these roots in the spawn can digest a lot of different materials to produce the mushrooms. So when we're talking about spawn, one of the things that you'll see is that there are a lot of different varieties, and you'll have spawn that grow on different mediums, and we can kind of talk about those. But you'll hear me talking about things like sawdust spawn, plug spawn, thimble spawn, and peg spawn. And basically those are kind of the mechanisms for having those roots be able to go in and produce the mushrooms. Yeah, in the grow mediums. Okay, all right, and then so the mycelium, you can think of mycelium as kind of the fungal roots again.
You're gonna have to wait a few minutes, okay? I'll get it in a few minutes, but I'm doing something right now, okay?
Okay, and sorry, I think someone wasn't muted, but okay, we'll go ahead and continue. So the next three terminologies that I want to hit on, one of them is substrate. Substrate is going to be the food source for the fungus, and we'll talk about multiple different types of substrates. Substrates can be things like wood chips, logs, straws, things like that. Another thing that you may hear is a spawn run. A spawn run is how long it takes for mycelium to make its way through a substrate. So it comes during the spawn run, it converts the substrate material into edible goods that it can ingest and then use to create the fruiting body, which is the actual mushroom. So once the mycelium has worked its way through a substrate, we refer to that substrate as being colonized. So, okay, so I know I'm throwing out a bunch of different terminology, but hopefully some of this is making sense. And as we continue to talk about this, you at least kind of remember, oh, we talked about that, and that's what that means. So
Do they use up their substrate at some point? Like plants use up the feed in the dirt?
Yeah, in fact, they use it up more so than plants do in a way, because a lot of times plants will, they'll get nutrients and water from the dirt, but they're actually, a lot of their energy is coming from the sun. So they're, in that way, plants are producers because they're able to produce from this energy. And conversely, fungi are decomposers. So how they get their source is to actually decompose and to break down and eventually use up anything that they're growing on, any substrate that they're growing on. So yeah, that was a very good question. Yeah, eventually they will use all of a substrate.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions? That was such a good one. Okay. All right, so let's see, and I apologize, did I cover inoculation? No, okay, all right, so inoculation is basically just the process of planting. And you'll plant in things like a log, a bed, or in straw, or in a lot of other materials, and we'll kind of talk about some of these different materials as we go on. So, okay. So now that we have talked about just some of the terminology, we'll go into some of the other things. So what are mushrooms? So this is actually kind of interesting. I actually had fun looking at the actual definition. So here I have definitions from both Wikipedia and dictionary.com, but I think it varies, just kind of reading them out. So mushrooms are the fleshy, spore-bearing, fruiting body of a fungus. So they're just one kind of part of a fungus. And then the other one is it's any various fleshy fungi, including toadstools, puffballs, coral fungi, morels, etc. So that's just kind of the general gist of what it is that they are. But kind of one of the things that I wanted to bring home was that technically what we think of as a mushroom is only one part of the actual whole organism. It is just the fruiting body of the overall organism. It's not the entire thing itself. Okay, so another thing along the lines are what are mushrooms, talking about the different types of kingdoms. There's wanted to kind of really bring home this idea that mushrooms are their entire kingdom. And one thing though too, within the fungi kingdom, it does not just include mushrooms. It does also include other eukaryotic fungi, and that includes things like yeasts and molds, and then also kind of the more typical mushrooms. Okay. All right. So now I touched on this a little bit, but let's kind of go into a little bit more depth. How are mushrooms different from plants? One of the differences, I think that one of the biggest things, it has to do with their nutrition. So plants, they're eukaryotic autotrophs. And they use chlorophyll in order to produce their food, essentially. So they use chlorophyll to be able to carry out photosynthesis. So they're a producer. Now, by contrast, fungi are heterotrophs, and they do not have chlorophyll. So they live as what are called saprophytes. So that means that they're feeding on dead or decaying matter, or they can also be parasitic. So they don't have to necessarily be dead or decayed, but typically that is what they are. So that's one of the big things, nutrition. Another one of the big differences, oops, and I moved on too quickly. I don't have a picture to kind of demonstrate this. There wasn't one that kind of showed it really well. But one of the differences is actually the cell wall of plants is different from the cell wall in fungus. And the differences are really interesting. Plant cell walls are made up of roots, and so that probably sounds pretty familiar to you. But fungal cell walls are actually made up of chitin. And chitin, if you haven't heard of chitin before, maybe you've heard of it before, but chitin is actually what is in the exoskeletons of arthropods. So you think of, so fungus is it's fungal cell walls are a weird kind of amalgamation or thing that's similar in some ways to plant cell walls, but it's like a shrimp cell wall in a way, because it has that arthropod type of exterior to them. So that's kind of just a really interesting side of things. So another thing that is very different between plants and fungi are how they reproduce. So for plants, usually they will reproduce by seeds, or sometimes they'll do vegetative reproduction. Conversely, fungi reproduce by spores.
Hey, Malia.
Yeah.
Sorry, Michelle has her hand up.
Oh, sorry, Michelle, I did not see that. Michelle, please.
Yeah, it's about nutrition. I want to start a compost bin. I'm a big recycler, and I was wondering, is there anything that I should not put in a compost bin if I then want to use, once that got done working, into, the feed and nutrition for mushroom?
So, and your only concern is the mushroom, not how you'll use the compost after the fact?
Yeah, the main thing is to use that, for mushrooms. If I'll probably at the current time make more than what little bit of mushroom I'm able to grow until we move. So, I mean, I'll just give it back to Mother Nature, but I want to make sure that I'm not putting anything in that a mushroom, that's gonna, affect the growth rate or the whatever it is of the mushrooms.
Right. And so to be honest, this is not something that I have experimented with myself.
Okay.
So this is going to be an educated guess. So take that for what it's worth, but it is something that I can look into as well. But from my educated guess, my guess is that if you're dealing with any sort of vegetable type matter or plant type matter, that's going to be totally fine to put in there. Things that I don't see mushrooms doing as well with are going to be things like fats or animals as much. They don't tend to grow on that naturally, so I don't anticipate that they would necessarily break that down easily. Okay. But again, that's just an educated guess. But my husband has something that he wanted to add. So
thank you.
And can you hear my husband okay? He was asking a question, but I don't know if he's close enough to the microphone for you to hear him.
No, that's
I
what I was
did not
going to
hear
say.
him, no.
Okay, well, you come closer to the microphone. So like, he just had a question to see
Well,
if he could.
So that's more. We still can't hear you, Matt.
Sorry about that.
There we go.
Okay, so when you're growing on compost, you're usually talking about growing like button mushrooms. And so that's what I was asking, what kind of mushrooms you were thinking about growing on the compost, because that matters. Because most of mushrooms, like stuff that hasn't been broken down yet.
I'm mainly, you know, I love to cook. I mean, I guess everybody's growing mushrooms to eat them. So I'm just interested in growing different types that are not in the store, especially here in Kentucky. I'm born and raised here, recently moved back here from Virginia near Richmond, and you can get all kinds of mushrooms. They have specialty stores, and here it's like pulling teeth to find anything but your Bella in the 3 different, you know, growth
Yeah.
rates. So I'm really interested in growing something unique and stuff that because I can't just go out and go through the forest. I have a back and knee issue. So it's mainly about, you know, adding flavor to my dishes.
Okay. So a lot of what we end up growing on, instead of like on the compost, we'll do like on a straw spawn, which we'll end up getting like the straw from the Tractor Supply, you know, that's already broke down in the compacted bales, and
Oh,
we'll
okay.
grow it on that.
And we will go
Okay.
into that a little bit further down. So if anyone's
Okay.
taking notes, we will cover that, I promise. But
Okay.
Okay, thank you
I'm
so
not trying to
much.
stop you, but
No, thank you so much. My first time. Thank you. I appreciate it very much.
Oh, no problem.
but yeah, I think kind of his thing is so for compost, they definitely would be beneficial, but for some of your culinary type mushrooms, that may be a different type of mushroom that would do, you know, than what would do well on compost. I think would be kind of a summary.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay. So I'm loving all these questions. Thank you so much for doing this. Okay. All right. So I think we went through the fungi role in nature, correct? So we are good to move on to the next thing. Okay. So now we're going to be talking about some commonly cultivated mushrooms. Now, again, these are by no means an exhaustive list of all the mushrooms that are out there. These are just some ones that are commonly cultivated, in part because of the ease of cultivation, in part because they're particularly tasty, things like that. But these are ones that we either have experience with or we know a lot of people tend to cultivate them. So these are some of the ones that we'll talk about, and so the ones that you might see more out there. Probably the one that I will talk about the most, because they are the ones that we grow the most, are oysters. And one of the things that I do want to mention with oysters is they're kind of put in this kind of umbrella group of oyster mushrooms. But even though they have some similarities, they really do have distinct tastes to them, and distinct time frames that they fruit. There is some variability to them, and it's really, really interesting to taste the different variations of the types of oysters. So even though they're in kind of this big umbrella, I just want you to know that there's a lot of variation even within that wider umbrella. Another one that is commonly cultivated as well as foraged is lion's mane. Lion's mane, it's called that, as you can kind of see, it kind of has what they call tooth, and it kind of looks kind of like a hairy part of a lion coming off of it. And in fact, talking about how how it's fun to eat mushrooms, one of my favorite mushroom recipes that we've ever made actually is using lion's mane. You get lion's mane, and you can kind of pull it apart into chunks about the size of crab cake. And then you can make similar to, they call them lion cakes. Basically, they're similar to crab cakes, but you use the lion's mane, and lion's mane actually have kind of a light seafoody taste to them. So you get that really fun kind of faux crab cake taste to it. They're very, very tasty. So anyway, if you do ever grow lion's mane, highly recommend it. Okay, and then another commonly cultivated mushroom is the shiitake. I have not actually grown shiitakes myself, in part because they are one that require growth on logs, but I am excited to hopefully one day do shiitake. Another thing interesting, just kind of side note, shiitake, it's a Japanese word, and it means, I believe, lover of oak, because they tend to grow on oak wood. So.
Malia, Tina has her hand up, ma'am.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much, Indy, for letting me know. Tina, yes, please.
Sorry, regarding the lion's mane, this made me think of this, and I don't know if this is true or not. So, or is there any truth to if it's white, it's all right as far as mushrooms go?
I would not do that with mushrooms.
Oh,
No.
no.
That was my
Yeah.
husband's question.
Yeah, you know, it is a good question, and I don't know of anyone off the top of my head. Oh, a destroying angel is white, so yeah, you don't want to do a destroying angel. Yeah, so so yeah, I would be personally, and again, this is the just wanting to be extra safe. I would not do a rule of thumb for anything mushroom related, just because there are a lot of very dangerous lookalikes. So it's not even just
Yeah,
like,
it's probably not a good idea to put them all in one category by color.
yeah, just to be safe. And again, even when you're if you are foraging, so I know that foraging is a whole separate conversation from the cultivating, but you know, when you do foraging, foraging and eating based on looks alone is usually pretty frowned upon. You're going to be doing looks, you're going to be doing spore prints, you're going to be doing spit tests. There's a lot of kind of levels of things that you want to do to get that absolutely positive identification. Because if you're not cultivating, you just have to be very, very, very serious or sure about what it is that you have. One of the, I think, phrases that I've used before is that the interesting things with mushrooms is that they can send you on a drug trip. They can kill you dead in very painful and very awful ways, or they can just be a tasty dish and nice side. And if you don't know which one that you're going to be consuming, don't consume it, because you know that those are kind of like, it's a range of choices somewhere in there. And some of the range is just, it may not kill you, but it's going to make you very, very sick, very ill. You know, so you want to be very, very careful. And someone was saying the spit test seems crazy to me. Yeah, I agree. I've never actually done the spit test myself. I've been told from multiple sources that you can taste, spit out, don't ingest, and it's considered safe by people who know more than I do, but I wouldn't personally feel comfortable. So certainly only do what feels comfortable to you, and always be very, very, very careful with any mushroom that is not cultivated.
Tina, did you have another question, ma'am? I'm sorry, your hand's still up.
No, that was just me not remembering to lower my hand.
No problem, ma'am. I'm
Sorry.
just making sure. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for all these questions. This is great. Okay, all right. So if there's no more, we'll go ahead and move on to the next thing. Okay, so now we are going to be talking about growing mediums. So this is going to be things that you can use to grow the mushrooms in. So the first one that I'm going to be talking about, and because this is the one that we prefer to use, because it's easy and cheap to come by, things like that. The oysters that we like to grow well in straw. So straw is one of the big ones. But the next one next to straw, another big one is going to be wood chips. And there are quite a few types of mushrooms that will require the nutrition from a wood chip versus a straw. So they're also a very good one, especially if you're doing, you know, down in beds and things like that. That can be another really good option. Another option to growing is logs. And that's where you use the full log. Now, one of the big benefits actually of doing logs, besides the fact that you have, you know, a lot of grow medium right there in the log, is you don't actually have to sterilize the log. You know, you don't have to sit there and worry about any sort of competing microorganisms inside the wood. The log with its bark around the outside is pretty much already sterile. So you can just kind of inoculate and go to town. So that kind of cuts out one of those extra steps. So that's just kind of one thing to bear in mind. Seems like one of the questions, can you mix straw and wood chips? So my husband is saying yes, and I was sitting here trying to think through. I don't know if I've seen anyone do that, and I don't know if it's because if there's a reason. What we come and come, he has some insight. I'm gonna make him come so you can hear him though.
So yeah, very much can, especially depending on what type of mushrooms you're growing. Not only can you mix the wood chips, but a good way to like grow shiitakes, other than just being on the logs, is you get the oak pellets and you mix them with the soybean hulls, which is they come in pellet forms too. And a soybean hull is basically, it's not the soybean, but it's the waste part of the plant. And you can just buy those in pellet forms, and you get the pellet forms for the oak pellets that you use for like a wood burning stove or something. You add water to that, mix it together, and that will make a medium to grow shiitakes. But you know, as far as like with the straw, you can mix use coffee grounds with it. You can even mix some wet cardboard in with it. The main thing is you want to sterilize all of this substrate first before you add the spawn to it.
All right. Okay. Awesome. Okay. Thank you. Okay. And thank you for all these good questions. Keep them coming. Okay. All right. So I think we were on logs. So the next one to touch on, which I think he touched on a little bit, but is another good one, is grain. Oh, yeah. So sterilization, that is a very good question. We will touch on that a little bit later, but there's multiple methods that you can use to sterilize. So yeah, the primary method, and you guessed it right away, Maria, is basically cooking it. We use boiling water to sterilize our straw. Basically, you just boil the water, you submerge the straw all the way in the water, and then allow it to cool. There are other kind of more chemical means to sterilize, but like I said, we will actually touch on that in a little bit. So if you guys don't mind, I'll wait till I have my the slide with the notes up, and we'll touch on that. Is that cool? Oh, all right. Thank you for the thumbs up. All right. So, so let's see. So we touched on grain. Another good one, I think Matt mentioned this as well. Coffee grounds is another good one. They actually recommend spent coffee grounds. So you know what? You have your cup of joe in the morning, and then you have something great that you can now use to grow mushrooms. So, and there's no waste. How great is that? So that's another good thing. And then kind of the last one on this list is soybean. So all of these things are different things that you can use as grow mediums. This one shows the mushrooms growing out of coffee grounds here, which I think is actually quite cute. Okay, all right. So moving on now to growing methods. So there are kind of pros and cons to each of these growing methods. We'll talk about what the methods are, and we can talk a little bit about when you want to use what and why, I guess, but we won't go too into depth unless anyone has any kind of specific questions for them. But we'll talk about what the methods are at least. So the first method, and probably kind of the easiest method, is a mushroom bed. And that is kind of, you know, like what it sounds like. It's basically like a flower bed, right? But you're using it to grow edible mushrooms. The next method, and this is my preferred method, and we'll be talking about, I love this one, and that is using buckets. Buckets allow it to be portable, so you can move things around during the different phases of the growing and the life cycle of the mushroom, which is very helpful. It's just good size for being able to carry around while still having a good harvest off of it. So it's a really useful type of thing. Plus buckets are pretty cheap to come by. So how deep should your grow bed be? You know what? I am not familiar. Okay, I was going to say, I'm not sure off the top of my head, but my husband says about 6 inches is going to be a good depth for a grow bed. This is why he's here.
So when you do a grow bed, what you do is almost just like a little raised bed. And what you'll do is just, have it down there, and you'll lay down like cardboard on the bottom to keep different critters from coming up in, not to mention the mushrooms themselves like the cardboard. And then you can lay down a layer of straw that has been sanitized. Like I said, Malia was telling you how we do it, how do we sanitize the straw is we'll, boil water, we'll fill like a cooler full of the straw, dump the boiling water on it, and let it set overnight and it cools off. So then we'll go out, in the grow bed, and you'll have the cardboard lay down, then you'll lay a layer of straw down, then you'll take your mushroom spawn, break it up over the top of it, and then you'll lay another layer of straw down, and then another layer of spawn, and then another layer of straw on top of that. So, and you want to do that in more of a shady area. You want it to where it gets some sunlight, but not totally sunlight. Mostly shade, and where it's going to be damp or humid.
Okay, so did he answer the question on how deep the grow bed should be at least? And we will cover some of the other things that he was mentioning here in a little bit as well. That's okay. All right, great. Thank you. See, this is why I keep him around. Okay, all right. So the next thing, so I said buckets was my favorite, but actually I also really like using a fruiting chamber. So the buckets, that's what we use for growing oyster mushrooms. The fruiting chamber is what we have personally used to grow lion's mane. So a fruiting chamber, like you can see this is just kind of a plastic tub where you drill some holes for airflow. And then you just get, we put perlite down here, wetted perlite, that just helps keep the entire fruiting chamber moist, so that, if it dries up a little bit here, some of that water that's soaked into the perlite will come up. So then as the mushroom actually, sorry, I'm pointing at my screen, and I realize you can't see me pointing at the screen, but anyway, so as the mushroom fruits, that moisture will be right there in the fruiting chamber. It basically just helps keep that small area where the mushroom's growing very humid, which mushrooms do need. Okay, so that's the fruiting chamber. So another thing that's kind of similar to a bucket is what's called a grow bag, but instead of having it being a hard-sided bucket, you're going to be doing it in kind of more of a long plastic bag. And kind of the nice thing with that is it's really easy to, slice holes into the bag to make your openings for the mushrooms to go through. It can be a little bit cheaper than the buckets. You have a little bit more options of sizing and things like that. So there are some benefits to doing a grow bag as well. And then another growing method that I have seen but have not personally tried, but that I think looks fantastic, and I actually do want to try it, and is very good for if you want to do it kind of indoors, maybe on a smaller scale, is actually to use jars. So if you have canning jars, it's the off season, you're not currently canning, and you want to use those jars for something, cultivating mushrooms could be an option for those jars. I don't know if you have extra jars laying around like I do. I hoard them like a dragon's hoard, because jars can be hard to come by. But yeah, this is another use for some of those empty jars.
And then on the
Oh, and so if you want a low cost option for fruiting, my husband actually created this earlier. And okay, so this is actually a juice container that had juice in it, cleaned it out, sterilized it, drilled holes throughout the juice container. And then actually you can see in here, he does have sterilized substrate. And this is actually going to be used as a fruiting chamber, a little mini fruiting chamber. And it cost us, well, I mean, technically we bought it for the juice, so it cost us nothing. Very good. Yep, so we have mushrooms colonizing in this right now. There's not really a whole lot to see yet, but hopefully soon we'll have something to see. And you know what, in a few weeks, if we do have something to see, I can snag a picture and send it over to Indy, and he can send to the group or something if we have something to show for this. So there's that. Okay. All right, so moving on now from our growing methods. Okay, so let's talk about when you want to grow mushrooms. Now, this is only a consideration if you're growing outdoors. If you're growing indoors in a controlled environment, then obviously you don't have to worry about this. You would control your environment to be what you need it to be when you need it to be it. But if you are doing it outdoors, this will be when the different types of time frames when they'll grow. As you can see, the fruiting time, now these are specifically oyster mushroom strains. So these time periods will be different for different types of mushrooms, but I just kind of wanted to show the variation even within the kind of same family of mushrooms. So you have some that are very warm weather right there hanging out in summer, but you have quite a few, as you can see, that are going to be enjoying the cooler weather, more spring and fall types of weather. Now, this is weather that's going to be kind of your typical, northern hemisphere type of environments. If you're growing in southern Florida, it's going to be very different from if you're growing in Maine. So this is kind of a generality. You might have to shift these timeframes depending on where your location is, but it does give you kind of a good general idea of when you have to do this. So anyway, all right, let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Okay, so I think I've mentioned a couple times. So growing oysters on straw is one of the methods that we have used the most. So that's kind of, we're going to go through the different steps specifically for that now. And these are the different steps that we're going to kind of go to at least a little bit more in depth on each of these steps. The first step is to just prepare the substrate that you're going to be growing the mushroom in. The next one is to inoculate that substrate with the spawn. Then after that, you're going to be incubating the spawn. Now, incubation of all of these things, that's the one that takes the longest time. The incubation period is the time that takes, that's, a few weeks to a few months, depending on the type of mushroom that you're growing. But so incubation is where most of the time is happening. Then fruiting is the exciting part of it. Fruiting is when it actually comes out, and that's when the edible part of the mushroom appears and grows out where you can see it. And then obviously the last stage is then harvesting. And so I'm going to take just a moment to take a glass of water. My voice is cracking just a little bit. All right, so now we're going to talk about each of these stages in more depth. So first step is preparing the substrate. Now for you personally, this is probably the one that takes the most time, I think, for you to actually do and get right. And to prepare the substrate, there's kind of three big things that you want to do. The first thing is to moisturize the substrate. The substrate needs to have plenty of water inside of it. The next thing is size. So if you're learning on straw, or you're growing on straw, sorry, you're going to want the straw to be broken up into smaller chunks, because it's actually easier for the mushroom to break down and to get the nutrients out of it if it's broken down. So for straw, you want it to be broken down into about 3 or 5 inches. 3 to 5 inches is about the length that you want for the straw. Do you have a, oh, so my husband actually has,
This is one.
he says, this is why we buy it from Tractor Supply, because it actually comes kind of free. Do you want to come show?
Yeah, it'll kind of be messy, but it's
Yeah,
already,
they can't
free.
quite see.
it's already pre-crushed, you know. Because if you buy just a regular straw bale, you'll have something to break it up, like either to cut it up or to put it in, you know, to smash it up to where it allows it to grow better. So one method you can do is, if you buy just a regular straw bale, put it in a garbage can, put a weed eater in there and just let it beat it up a lot. And then it'll be that the mushrooms will take a lot better on it.
Okay. All right. So that's the size. And then the last thing is sterilization. So the important thing with sterilization is basically what you're trying to ensure by doing this is that the mushrooms are not competing with anything else for the nutrients. And also just that, so not only they're not competing with nutrients, but you also just don't have bad things that are in there that could make you sick if they're in there, or just anything like that. I mean, the competition is probably the main thing, but it's good to have a sterile substrate that it can grow in, and you know exactly what's growing on it. So, okay. So, all right, so the first stage, after you prepare the substrate, the first thing that you're going to do is actually inoculate it. So inoculation comes from the Latin term inoculationem, or inoculationem, but it basically means to engraft or to butt into things. So one of the things to bear in mind is that I found pretty useful is the idea that you want your inoculation to be 5 to 10% net weight of straw to spawn. So for example, if you had 20 pounds of wet straw, so not 20 pounds of dry straw, but 20 pounds of wet straw, you'll need at least 1 pound of spawn to inoculate that. And then when you do the inoculation, this is just kind of, again, remember to sterilize every item that is coming into contact with things. So that's not just the container that it's going in, but also your hands, any implements that you're using, things like that. So you can sterilize these things by, again, dunking in boiling water, by using, sanitizing, rubbing alcohol, things like that. But just remember to sterilize each of these things along the way. Okay. So after inoculation, next comes incubation. So this is where basically you're going to sit and let it grow. This is the exciting time. So where you want to set it during the actual incubation time, the optimal temperature is about 75 to 77. But the big thing is to not let it get too hot. Mushrooms can handle cold fairly well. They won't fruit very much, but they won't die off. But you are going to start getting spawn death at some of those higher temperatures, and definitely slower growth above 90. So again, also on the incubation, one of the things that, again, for those of you who are in Kentucky or any of these kind of humid areas, mushrooms love humidity. They're going to thrive, especially in around 80% humidity. So that's what you want to try to keep it, especially if you have a controlled environment. That's where you want to keep it. And then for light, mushrooms don't need light quite as much as kind of your typical, photosynthesizing plant. They still do need some light, and they say about 10 to 12 hours of natural light is recommended for most mushroom types, and particularly in this case, we're talking oysters. Okay. All right, so pinning and fruiting. So now if you remember, so previously we were talking about incubators. So this is where things get a little bit different. So if you notice, the temperature in incubation is 75 to 77. But when they go from just incubating to suddenly pinning, they actually recommend that you take it into a cooler environment to help that pinning and fruiting happening. So it needs to be specifically UV light as opposed to a light bulb. Matt, feel free to jump in. They don't need like a UV light. I think a light bulb would give them the kind of light that they need. I don't think a UV light would be bad necessarily, but this is just guessing. I'm actually not sure of the answer on that light, on that one, but I can look into that if you like. You just make a quick note.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, so we will look into UV light. One thing my husband did want to mention is that they do need airflow as well. Okay, so when they come to pinning and fruiting, so the temperature needs to come down a little bit to help the fruiting happen, and the humidity needs to go up a little bit. Yes, so let's talk about what pinning is. And actually this works perfectly moving into what I wanted to show here, because this is one of our mushroom buckets. This is actually one that we grew, and you can actually kind of see what I'm talking about. So this is one of our mushroom buckets. So pinning is where you just start to see the mushroom mycelial growth. So not the big central fruiting one that you see right here, but in the hole above that, you notice you can see some of the substrate, but you can just start to see some of the little pieces of mycelium just starting to work their way through. You can almost think of it like the head of a pin. I'm not sure if that's exactly where the phrase came from, but that's kind of what I think of when I hear that phrase, is the idea of the head of a pin just starting to poke through and coming out. So does that answer your question, Ramona?
Sorry, I was very muted. Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, all right, great. That's a good question. Okay, so pinning is just starting to push through, and then fruiting is when it actually comes out. And so we have pinning in some of these other ones, but then in this middle one where you see everything coming out, that's actually coming out and fruiting now. All right, so another thing to bear in mind is that you will have, as long as the conditions are right, you're going to have multiple fruitings throughout. So, but one thing, so there's a couple of things to bear in mind. So you'll have multiple fruitings. So once you get a fruiting, you're not done. You don't need to pull it down and, and start from scratch. You can kind of keep them going. But what you want to be getting is, so the first fruiting will be your biggest and best and most impressive fruiting. All subsequent fruitings, each one that you have from there, the yield and the quality will kind of go down over time. So you still want to do it. You're still going to get more mushrooms out of it, but you'll notice that what you're getting out of each subsequent flush will get, like I said, smaller and a little lower quality each time. So just kind of something to bear in mind. Okay, so here so this picture is demonstrating some of the pinning, and then here in this one we wanted to show some of the larger fruiting of the mushrooms coming out of the bucket. Yeah. So, and what my husband wanted to say is that, so all of these, so even these big clumps of these mushrooms, they're all growing out of these small 3/8 inch holes, and they all can grow out of there. Okay, all right. So, and then the last kind of step is harvesting. So if you don't recognize this guy, this is my husband when he hasn't dyed his beard white. And this is one of the harvests that he's done from one of our buckets. So you can see he's holding one of the clumps that came out of one of those 3/8 inch holes. All of that came out of one of those inches. Now, when you're harvesting them, there's basically kind of there's three kind of ways that you can do it. And I have the three different ways here listed, from most preferred way of harvesting to least preferred way. The probably most preferred way is to just cut. So just, you know, pocket knife and like that, just kind of cut easily. The other option is you can pluck, just kind of pull it out. Slightly less preferred because you're pulling out a little bit more than you need to, a little bit more than you'll be eating, and that can continue to grow. And then the last, least preferred, and this is more for things that aren't in a bucket. This would be more for things in a bed. They don't recommend you raking up the mushrooms to get it, because it's going to break up all of the mycelium, down in the ground and the floor, and it'll break up, and it'll mean that they won't be able to continue to fruit. So you definitely do not want to rake. That's, well, I mean, it's not that you can't, but you will definitely be hindering your ability to get subsequent harvests and flushes from that bed. So we're getting kind of towards the end of what the things to do, but this is probably my favorite thing to do with mushrooms. I mean, I love growing them, but I really love eating them. One of the things about mushrooms is that they are very high in vitamins, minerals, antioxidants. There are a ton, and you can, I actually started looking up health benefits of mushrooms, and people will wax poetic if you actually want to go out and do some of your own research, but just there are a lot of vitamins, there are a lot of minerals, there are a lot of antioxidants. They are also low in calories, so you get a lot of that taste, a lot of that flavor, but not a lot of calories to go with that. One thing to bear in mind when you're eating mushrooms, some mushrooms must be cooked to be safe to eat. So perfectly safe, as long as they're cooked, but you definitely want to do that. So an example of that is a morel mushroom. Morel mushrooms are considered a choice edible, very good mushroom, but you have to cook them. You don't eat them raw. So it's just kind of something to bear in mind. Even the ones that aren't dangerous when they're raw, you'll find that if you want to get the nutrients out of it, you do have to cook it as well. So like kind of your button mushrooms, perfectly safe to eat raw, but you're not getting much nutrients out of a raw button mushroom. You're mostly getting freshness, right? You're mostly getting water content, maybe a little bit of flavor, but not a lot of nutrients. So if you wanted to get those nutrients, you would need to actually kind of cook it down to break down those cell walls to be able to get it. So will scraps of mushrooms become new substrate? Now, by substrate, do you mean something that mushrooms can grow on, or mushrooms can grow from? Like, do you mean that they will spawn new mushrooms, or do you mean that they can just be used to put spawn on to grow new mushrooms? Does that question? Okay, yeah. So will they become spawn? It depends. It depends on where they are in their growth cycle when they're scrapped as to whether or not they will do that. If they've gotten to the point where they have released their spores, then or they're getting ready to release their spores, you can get spawn from some of those scraps. But if it's but they also do need to be, yeah, they also do need to, you know, be anyway, they need other ones to do it. So okay, sorry. My husband's saying you can clone mushrooms from some of the substrate. Do you want to talk? Oh, from the scraps. Yeah, sorry, the scraps. Do you want to talk about that anymore? Just okay. All right. So you can potentially do that. Did I answer your question? I feel like I kind of went on a tangent there. Sorry. Okay. All right. You're very kind. Yeah. So my husband's saying there's a whole process of going out doing that, and unfortunately, it might be a little bit beyond what we can go through here. Oh, he says there's a simple method and a hard method, but there's definitely ways that it can be done, but it might take a little bit of research, and I don't have that kind of right in front of me, so apologies for that. Sure. My husband says he'll go through it real quick. So he'll give you the Cliff Notes version. And okay.
Okay.
Do you want to sit down?
Yeah. All right. So yes, you can grow it from scrap mushrooms. There's a likelihood that it won't be, it might not have a great success rate by doing that. But if you get a good substrate that's nice, sterile, clean environment, give it a couple, cut up a couple pieces of mushrooms, throw it in there and see if it colonizes it. That's the easy method. The harder method is you get the mushroom, you put it on a piece of tin foil, and you let the spores come out. And you let it set overnight, and you'll see like a spore print on there the next day. And you take that, and you get in your clean environment box. You make this box up that keeps the airflow down, or you have a hood, a flow hood that keeps the airflow going through to keep the air pure, so you don't get any like molds or stray yeast in from the air. And then you get like what I have right here is petri dishes. These are a bunch of just like the petri dishes like you take from like the doctor's office to do a culture test. And you take those spores that you get from that and you put it on the petri dish and you let it grow for a week or so, and it'll colonize the petri dish. And from there you could take that and then colonize a whole bag of substrate, your grain spawn or whatever, and let it colonize through that. And then you take that and go through, and you can either use that as a full grow bag, or you can add that to your straw, or whatever you're planning on growing. Like I said, it's a whole bigger process to go through all that, but that's pretty much how you do it. You can also buy liquid spawn, and do the same thing and inoculate the stuff it comes in like a syringe type, sub thing. Hopefully that answers it. I'll turn it back to Malia. I'm trying not to hijack her thing here.
No, see, but this is why I do these things, but he is the one who really, really knows this stuff. So I'm grateful that he's here to provide his expertise. So thank you. Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll get there in just a moment when we get further down. Okay, all right. So
Hopefully that answers the question.
yeah. So he just wanted. So did that answer the question? Just wondering if we're good to move on. Okay. All right. Great. Okay, all right. So preserving. Okay, so there are a lot of different ways to preserve mushrooms. Let me one of them is to dehydrate them. It's actually really easy to dehydrate. It's easy to then, hydrate them back up, putting it especially in soups and stews and things like that. You can also freeze them. If you do freeze them, usually it's recommended that you cook them before you put them in the freezer. And usually you would blanch them or steam them or fry them before you do it. Another option is to can them. Canned mushrooms can be another great way to kind of have those available for cooking in the kitchen. But another thing, the last one on here, it's actually one of my more favorite things. I mean, I actually love eating them fresh very much, obviously. But one of my favorite things is a thing called mushroom ketchup. And if you've never heard of mushroom ketchup, it's actually very similar to Worcestershire sauce. It has kind of a very good, intense umami type flavor to it. Really, really tasty. If you want to make mushroom ketchup, there's a lot of actual full videos and write-ups online. So look that up, or just ping me. I can send you some of my favorite ones. Very, very tasty. I can highly recommend it. So, okay, so those are some of the ways that we preserve. And now we have gone past the hour, which is good, but because we are actually now officially at the end of the presentation. So I will go ahead and turn it back over to Indy or to any of the group if there are further questions. Oh yeah, so and also we do have some tools to show you if we wanted to have kind of an availability to do kind of a show and tell if you want to see any of the tools. So I can turn that over to Matt or Indy. You want to do some tools, Indy?
No, go ahead. Help yourself.
Okay, all right.
Well, so if you're doing log inoculations, first off, you get your oak log and you need to drill a hole in it. You go in about an inch into the whole log. Well, I use a peanut grinder worth it.
Hey,
And they
Matt,
actually, you can, yeah.
sorry. Why don't y'all stop sharing since you're done with your presentation? That way you fill up the screen and we get a better picture of what y'all are showing.
Oh, okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. So we use this peanut grinder like this if we're not inoculating a log. And you can buy this little tool set here that comes on it. It's just like almost like a little router bit, you know, and it hooks right onto your peanut grinder. You can use a drill for it, but this is a lot faster. And I can show you real quick on how fast it is here in just 1 second. And here, as soon as Malia, I'll have her move the computer over here in a minute. But once you get the holes drilled in the logs, then you'll use an inoculation tool like this. And what this does is it goes down, you have your bag of spawn, it goes down in it, it fills up the end with a little bit of spawn, you go over to the hole you drill, and it just, you push on the end and it pushes, compacts it down inside the log. And then you cover it over with like a beeswax or a candy wax. And then you take your log and you'll take it out in the woods and let it sit for 6 months to a year, you know, or the logs will last about 5 years. You know, usually you use a log anywhere between 6 to 10 inches around. So, and you want to cut the logs usually in midwinter because the sap stops flowing through it and you're less likely to get diseases in your logs that way. So anyways, I'll have her camera around and I'll show you as far as drilling. Well, here's one of our buckets that we have. This is why you use the peanut grinder versus the drill, because it goes that fast. You know, if you were using a drill bit, it would take you about, 3 times as long. But then, like I said, with this tool, you would get in. I don't have any spawn here right now, but you'd stick it in the spawn. It would fill up the end. You'd go above the hole, wherever you have, and you just pop it in, and then you'd cover it over with wax. And that's how you would do a log. You know, and oak is usually the best. And for the most part, that's for like growing shiitakes. Grow really good on that. The reishi mushrooms, mushrooms grow really good on logs. Oysters will grow really good on logs. And yeah. So, and then here's one of our buckets. So if we're doing oysters, yeah, this is just one of our buckets, like what we she showed you a picture of the mushrooms growing out of earlier. And what I'll do is I'll drill 4 holes in the bottom to let the water drain out, because you want the straw damp, but you don't want it soaking wet. You want to have it to be able to drain, because your mushrooms, they like it damp, but they don't like it soaking wet. But then I use, like I said, a 1/4 inch to a 3/8 drill bit, and I just kind of stagger the holes around the bucket. to let the mushrooms grow out of it. When we do it, we'll put a layer of straw in here, and then you'll break up a layer of spawn, then another layer of straw, another layer of spawn, and just keep on doing that until the whole bucket's filled. Put the lid on it. Takes a few weeks to colonize, and I'll just literally just have this hanging in a shed, or I'll take it and have it hanging in a tree out in the woods.
Hey, Matt,
Yeah.
when you're putting your mushroom in the bucket there, do you put them to the edge, or does it make a difference and they just naturally seek out those holes? I guess you know what I'm saying. How do you put them in there?
When you do it, so when you buy it, you know, when you buy the spawn, usually it comes in a bag. It's on a grain spawn. So think of a bag of wheat that has mold all growing through it. It's the mycelium. And so you put the straw in, and then you'll just take a clump of it and you just break it up and sprinkle it all through there. Because what it's going to do is going to colonize this entire bucket. So if you pull the lid off after about 2 weeks, this whole bucket's going to look solid white. It's just going to look like it's just totally full of white, almost like not mold, but similar to like just white mold. Yeah, I think everybody that's been on the farms have lifted up a hay bale and seen that like white layer underneath a wet hay when a hay bale got wet. That's the mycelium.
Oh, okay.
And this whole bucket's going to look just like that. So yeah, you don't want to go towards the edge. It doesn't matter. It'll grow that right out to that anyways.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't for sure.
Sorry, I kind of got a little long-winded on that one. So, and then here's the other one. This is our fruiting chamber that we have. You know, it's a little different than the one she had on the video, because I have these little ones with screens on it right here, and that's just to allow the airflow going. And what we'll do with this is we've got the perlite in the bottom, and you just pick up the perlite from Walmart or wherever, and that'll just keep the humidity in here. And then I've got these little teeny, these were those little egg crates you get, you know, and I ended up cutting them off. They're the ones you get in like the school section of the store. And it's just all that is something to keep the bag of spawn up out of the perlite. So that way it can not get soaked, but you can actually just keep it really wet down in there, but without your bag of spawn getting totally soaked.
Michelle, you had a question. You have your hand up, ma'am. You'll have to unmute yourself, Michelle.
I'm sorry, my skipping
that's
them,
okay.
getting every 3 or 4 words. Where do you all buying and spawn from is the best question.
Yes, we will actually we'll end up purchasing from Field and Forest is where we usually get ours from. But yeah, I mean, even Amazon sells it. Every now and then you can find it in Lowe's, you know, in those little grow bags. And yeah, you know, so we ourselves will purchase it. And I am in the process of doing some of the petri dish inoculations ourselves so that we can clone, you know, so that we don't have to keep buying over and over and over. You know, the whole plan is to be able to clone our own mushrooms so that we don't have to ever buy the spawn again, or at least, you know, so that's the plan. So hopefully, does that hopefully answer your question there? Or
She was saying your audio feed for her is skipping. And she asked if it was going to be on YouTube, because most of your audio is coming through fine. You're pixelating kind of bad at times, but your audio is coming through. So yes, Michelle, it will be on YouTube probably in the next day or so.
And to be honest, what I would, if it's your first time growing mushrooms, buy a kit. experiment with the kit and see if you like growing them, you know, and they have the whole instructions of going through the kit, and that way you're not blowing a lot of money by buying a whole bunch of different spawn from the different places. Just get a kit and experiment with it. Start out small and see if you like it. Hopefully.
Seeds keep sometimes for up to 80 years. How long do mushroom spores keep for if they aren't growing?
I am not sure on that one.
So I know.
Okay.
Them from, they usually don't recommend you wait more than, I think they were saying like a few months. Some of them they'll keep a little bit longer if you keep it in the fridge. Some of them you definitely don't want to refrigerate. So, look at what your types are, but there are some ways to keep it for some time period. My understanding is that they're not going to have the same type of resilience. The actual mycelium is not going to have the same type of resilience that a seed would have, but maybe a spore would. Yeah, but you're not really using. Yeah. Oh, Matt's saying, think of it like a sourdough. Yeah. Yeah, the sourdough is kind of a living organism. You have to keep feeding it to keep it going. So you kind of think of it like that. It's not kind of like a dormant type seed that seeds can kind of just sit there for a while. Actual mycelium is kind of in its growth phase.
But the spores, because he was saying buy a kit, and I was thinking, if you kept the kit dry and dark, would the spores wait?
So a kit is not going to be spores. A kit is going to be mycelium. Usually.
Okay. Thank you.
And I know it's different kind of terminology. It's kind of a whole different world than seed. So but so you can keep it for a while, but I don't think it would have the shelf life.
Okay.
Quote unquote shelf life.
So it's something we have to work on actively cultivating to keep our own if we want to be self-sufficient at this. It's not something that we can save up for next year.
Yeah, you can potentially save up for a few, like I said, few months down the road, but you're not going to be able to stick it away for years and years and go, oh well, I've at least I've got my mycelium if I need it in a decade. That
right,
probably
right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Well, I guess at this point, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Indy.
Malia, Matt, thank y'all very much again for allowing us into your home and sharing your knowledge and stuff. It's been very, very informative. I'd never thought about how, I don't want to say complicated, but how much there is to growing mushrooms. Because I love mushrooms. I love grilled mushrooms and just about anything you can think of. So thank you for sharing. I know there's been some questions about foraging, so we'll look about maybe getting a foraging class for mushrooms too. But Malia, thank y'all very much. Appreciate everything y'all done and sharing your information with us.
Thank you for having me.
And ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate all y'all that made it tonight. We've seen a lot of new faces. That's great. That's what we're about. Sharing information, getting to know everyone, and making contacts and connections. For those of you that wasn't involved at the very beginning, our next class, Zoom class, will be January 25th, and it's on composting basics and talking about the nutrients and stuff that's developed and stuff from composting. So we plan on doing 2 Zoom classes a month, all the way through 2023. November and December, we may only do 1 per month just because of the holidays and stuff. Thank y'all very much. Y'all have a good night. Have a good rest of your week and have a safe weekend. Thank y'all very much. Hope to see y'all next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
We hope you found this class beneficial and that it gives you a good starting point to cultivate your own mushrooms for food and medicinal purposes. We have a lot more learning opportunities coming this year. In addition to virtual Zoom classes each month, we will be adding some interviews as well as custom content. In addition to the Zoom classes, we have 4 great in-person learning and fellowship opportunities. We have the Patriot Homesteaders Conference, April 28th through the 30th at the Scott County Fairgrounds in Scottsburg, Indiana. We have the M.A.G Meet and Greet Overnight Campout, June 24th through the 25th at Double J Stables in Mammoth Cave, Kentucky. We have the Kentucky Bushcraft Weekend, July 21st through the 23rd, also at Double J Stables in Mammoth Cave, Kentucky. We also have the Heartland Homesteading Conference, September 29th through October 1st at Home Place on the Green River in Campbellsville, Kentucky. We are working on more great learning opportunities, so be sure to subscribe and like our YouTube channel or join one of our Facebook groups to keep up with the latest information. Again, I want to thank Malia and Matt with Hidden Hilltop Homestead for opening their home to us and sharing some great information. On behalf of the M.A.G Network, I am Indy Guy. Be safe and have the knowledge.